evening. You're watching ARIRANG News at 8. It's Wednesday, February 5th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I am Yoo Ji-hye. We begin this evening with some welcome news on inter-Korean relations. The two Koreas have reached an agreement on when to hold the much-anticipated and much-delayed reunions for families separated by the Korean War. They're set for the third week of February, and if they go as planned, they'll be the first reunions in more than 3 years. Hwang Sung-hee has our top story.
After just 4 hours of discussions, the two Koreas agreed on Wednesday to resume the long-suspended reunions for families separated by the Korean War.
The Koreas have agreed to hold a round of family reunions from February 20th to the 25th at Mount Kumgang.
The divided family members selected for last year's cancelled reunions will take part, with 100 South Koreans meeting with their loved ones in the first round and another 100 North Koreans taking part in the second round. A team of South Korean engineers will cross the border on Friday to check on facilities at the Mount Kumgang resort, and a South Korean delegation will follow 5 days ahead of the event. The planned reunions coincide with South Korea's annual joint military exercises with the United States, which run from late February through April. North Korea had earlier warned that the humanitarian event could not take place during the military drills, and experts had pointed to the possibility of the North making a counter-proposal on the reunion dates. However, the upcoming drills were not a major issue during the talks.
There was no specific mention by North Korea of the South Korea-U.S. joint military drills, nor a call for the military exercises to be canceled during the talks.
Regarding North Korea's last-minute cancellation of a round of family reunions last year, the ministry said the two sides agreed that such an incident should not happen again. Millions of Koreans were separated by the Korean War more than 6 decades ago, and considering their ages, the time to see their loved ones one last time is running out. The two Koreas agreed to meet for another round of Red Cross talks following the family reunions to discuss a wide range of humanitarian issues, which includes holding the family reunions on a regular basis. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
But the two Koreas may be making progress in improving their frayed relations, but hopes of a nuclear-free peninsula appear to be diminishing, with the North continuing advancements in its nuclear programs and refusing to abandon them. Connie Kim reports.
The United States has once again firmly laid out its demand that North Korea take the initial steps towards denuclearization in order to resume the six-party talks. At a press briefing in Washington Tuesday, Daniel Russell, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia, said talks with North Korea should focus on denuclearizing the Korean peninsula and should not be talks for talk's sake. He also said Washington stands ready to negotiate with Pyongyang, but only on the basis of a statement signed in 2005. Under the landmark deal, Pyongyang agreed to scrap its nuclear program in return for security, economic, and energy benefits. However, the North failed to abide by the agreement, carrying out 3 nuclear bomb tests between 2006 and 2013. Russell's comments echo those made by Glenn Davies, the U.S. envoy on North Korea, who said last week that the six-party denuclearization talks will not resume unless Pyongyang changes its policy direction. The U.S. and North Korea remain at odds as Pyongyang has not shown any change in its position in recent years. Speaking in Moscow on Tuesday, the North Korean ambassador to Russia said the chance of resuming the talks was fading away because of Washington's hostile policy towards the North. The six-party talks involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia have not been held since late 2008. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Well, China, North Korea's closest ally, has long stood by its reclusive neighbor despite its demands and defiance, including provocations aimed at South Korea and its development of nuclear weapons. Though few in Beijing may want to admit it, there are growing voices in the country questioning its policies toward the North. Paul Lee has the details.
The Chinese Academy of Social Sciences released last month their Blue Book report on the development of Asia-Pacific affairs for 2014. The Beijing-based institute is the highest state-run research organization in the country and is considered one of the top think tanks in Asia. The new report mapped out 3 scenarios for the Korean peninsula over the next 5 to 10 years. It said either the two Koreas would unite, maintain the status quo, or that escalating tensions would result in military conflict in the region. The Academy said that in order to stabilize the peninsula, and in light of greater national interests, China might have to consider dropping its support for Pyongyang. The report stated that in the event North Korea continues to stage provocative acts, Beijing should not adhere to its stance of never abandoning North Korea. According to Chinese experts, Beijing shifted its foreign policy direction on the North after the regime unilaterally went ahead with long-range rocket launches and nuclear arms tests. They say North Korea has become more of a liability than a strategic asset and partner. It's an issue that the Chinese government has been reluctant to discuss publicly in the past, and therefore the release of such analysis was surprising.
This new report from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences deals with how China should respond to the developing changes in Asia-Pacific affairs.
The report also said that there was almost zero possibility of an all-out war erupting between the two Koreas in the near future. The release of this latest national report may suggest that China has a growing interest in unification, while letting its closest ally know that all options are on the table. Paul Yi, ARIRANG News.
As she enters her second year in the nation's top office, President Park Geun-hye began receiving status reports from government ministries and offices on this Wednesday. For the next 20 days, she will be briefed on their detailed plans to achieve her policy goals. Our presidential office correspondent, Oh Jin-ju, has more.
How well have government ministries and offices performed the tasks set by the Park administration over the past year? The Office for Government Policy Coordination handed in report cards to President Park on Wednesday for the first time in government history. Out of the 140 listed tasks, 21% were said to be on the right track, 60% received satisfactory marks, and around 20% got poor grades. Now, as for categorizing the tasks into President Park's 4 major goals, the government did well in laying the foundation for a peaceful reunification last year, receiving high marks in 41% of the related tasks, while it got the poorest grades for tasks related to economic revitalization. Topping the evaluation list were the ministries of Defense, Gender Equality, and Foreign Affairs. Based on the evaluations, each ministry is required to submit plans to enhance their performance for 2014 sometime this month. During the first day of the government status reports, President Park put great emphasis on 2 things: getting rid of unnecessary regulations and normalizing abnormal practices and policies. She ordered ministries to determine the difficulties companies are facing and to devise methods to help them, for example, by capping the total number of regulations. The president also called on ministries to work towards eliminating lax management in the public sector and establish laws to root out corruption. The ministries and offices will be separated into 9 groups based on the issues they deal with to give their status reports. President Park says this is designed to reflect her emphasis on cooperation among related ministries in reaching her administration's key policy goals. The status reports will run through February 24th. Oh Jin-ju, ARIRANG News.
And staying at Cheongwade, the new spokesperson for President Park Geun-hye's office has been named. It's Min Kyung-wook, a senior reporter and former newscaster. Min started a career as a reporter at KBS in 1991 and has since served as the TV station's Washington correspondent and the main anchor of its flagship news program. He met with reporters Tuesday afternoon and said he would do his best to communicate with the press so that the Park administration can enhance its communications with the public. The appointment comes about a month after former presidential spokesperson Kim Hang resigned, citing personal reasons. Now, following his ruling party counterpart's speech on Tuesday, the head of the main opposition Democratic Party delivered his own keynote speech at the National Assembly on Wednesday. He vowed to reform politics and pushed to narrow the gap between the haves and have-nots. Kim Hyun-ji has the details.
Addressing the full assembly and members of President Park Geun-hye's cabinet on Wednesday, Democratic Party chief Kim Han-gil said his party will be at the forefront of reforming parliament and party politics.
We will push for the passage of our bill aimed at preventing lawmakers from abusing their privileges. For this, we will work towards setting up an independent ethics committee that can keep a watch on lawmakers and execute the contents of this bill.
Earlier this week, the Democratic Party leadership issued a political reform proposal that centers around scrapping the privileges of lawmakers and includes having all lawmakers report to an independent ethics committee their plans for overseas travel and commemoration ceremonies for the publication of their books. Kim also called for a rigorous reform of the parliamentary system itself. Specifically, he proposed having the parliament open year-round, operating the parliament's budget committee at all times, and constantly carrying out a parliamentary audit of the government. Kim said his party will fight the government's downsized basic old-age pension plan, saying President Park must fulfill her original pledge to give all senior citizens aged 65 and above 200,000 won, or $185 every month. He also said his party opposes the government's policy to allow hospitals to form for-profit subsidiaries, saying the healthcare sector should be made more public, not less. He stressed that reunification with North Korea is not something that can be obtained overnight.
President Park said reunification will be like a jackpot that has created a rosy fantasy that reunification will come easy and quickly. I am concerned about this situation.
Saying the public needs to agree on how to prepare for a peaceful reunification with North Korea, the Democratic Party chief called for the establishment of a preparatory body comprised of the government, lawmakers, and civic leaders. 김현지, ARIRANG News.
That very visit.
Touch base with journalists, experts, and analysts who are taking the pulse of Asia's heartbeat.
South Korea's defense minister.
In a lively half hour, join ARIRANG's Yoo Ji-hye for the day's top stories, current affairs, business, technology trends, plus global weather forecasts, and more. ARIRANG News. Every weeknight, live on ARIRANG TV.
The recent turbulence in the global economy has spread from vulnerable emerging markets to major economies like the U.S. and Europe, and is fanning worries here in Korea as to whether the country is strong enough to weather the storm. Yoo Ji-hye has the answer.
Is Korea headed for a crisis along with other emerging market economies, or will it differentiate itself from the rest of the pack? The benchmark Kospi closed at a 5-month low on Tuesday, and offshore investors sold a net $1.4 billion worth of Kospi stocks in January. Despite the major sell-off, however, Korea still seems on a different path from that of developing economies.
The struggling developing countries all have something in common: current account deficits, budget deficits, and political turmoil. Korea, in contrast, is relatively free from political strife and has healthy economic fundamentals that make it stand in stark contrast to those countries.
During the huge stock sell-off in January, foreign funds flowed into the bond market, $1.6 billion worth, which is some $200 million more than the amount they sold in the stock market. Korea's credit default swap premium for its sovereign bonds, which shows a country's default risk, also stands much lower than that of other emerging market economies, at 75.5. This is compared to India's 275.4 and Indonesia's 235.2. Korea also has an ample amount of foreign currency reserves, as it has posted current account surpluses for the past 24 months. On top of that, there's Korea's large foreign exchange reserves, which hit a record high of $348 billion last month. Experts say that given its strong economic fundamentals, it is highly unlikely that Korea will be hard hit by the crisis hitting developing countries. But since foreign investors do hold a large amount of Korean stocks and bonds, the hint of a crisis could cause a major market shakeup this year. Yoo Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
And Finance Minister Hyun Oh-suk assured the public on Wednesday that the government will step up its monitoring of the markets so we can minimize the impact of external shocks. Hyun also warned against brisk reaction to changing market developments, adding that it will continue to bolster domestic demand and reduce its heavy dependence on exports. Korean stocks, meanwhile, bounced back on Wednesday from declines in the two previous sessions. The benchmark Kospi rose 0.2% on a slight rise in emerging market currencies and an overnight rebound on Wall Street. The tech-heavy Kosdaq fell by 0.4%, while the Korean currency was trading stronger against the greenback at 1,078 won. The Korean government is planning to do more to foster provincial universities over the next 5 years. The Education Ministry announced Wednesday it would dedicate over $1 trillion, or roughly $930 million as part of a 5-year plan to improve universities located outside of urban areas. About 60 to 70 universities are expected to benefit from the program, which starts this year. The ministry will accept applications until the end of April, and the universities will be selected in June. It added that admissions at the participating universities will be cut by 20,000 at most. The new visa rules for foreigners wanting to marry and live in Korea will be enforced beginning in April. They'll have to prove they have basic Korean language skills by either passing a language test or completing a language course. As for the Korean partner, he or she will only be eligible to marry a foreigner in Korea if they earn an annual income of roughly $14,000, which is more than 120% the minimum cost of living. The Ministry of Justice says the rules are intended to address social problems that arise from international marriages, including domestic violence due to communication difficulties or a lack of ability to financially support the family. The Korea and Japan have been locked in a renewed diplomatic spat over Japan's distorted views on history. Relations between the two countries at their lowest point in years, some politicians and ambassadors of foreign countries have sided with Korea in calling on Japan to sincerely apologize for its wartime atrocities. Our Shin Se-min has the details.
Politicians and envoys from countries far and wide have been taking Japan to task for its renewed glorification or attempted whitewashing of its past wrongdoings. Influential figures from nations including the United States and Britain have called on Tokyo to issue a clear and frank apology for its wartime atrocities. They specifically want Japan to apologize for its military wartime use of sex slaves and for Japanese lawmakers' continued visit to a war shrine that honors several Class A war criminals. A congressman from California, Mike Honda, recently sent a letter to Secretary of State John Kerry urging him to pay closer attention to the issue of the so-called comfort women who were forced to provide sexual services to Japanese troops during the World War II. Honda has consistently pushed for Japan to apologize, calling it a human rights matter, not something that should just be consigned to history. In his letter to Kerry, Honda calls on him to encourage Tokyo to apologize to the sex slave victims who were thought to have numbered as many 200,000, with many of those from Korea. The letter also points out that more and more are passing away in a reminder that time is limited for the remaining survivors to receive their long-delayed apology. He said that although some believe Japan has already issued an apology, it is clear the Japanese government has not done enough to apologize to the victims. The British ambassador to Japan, Tim Hitchens, also urged Japan this week to admit its historical wrongdoings and to improve its relations with its neighbors. At a conference in Tokyo Monday, Hitchens indirectly asked Prime Minister Shinzo Abe not to visit the controversial Yasukuni Shrine again, saying the best way for Japan to correct its historical mistakes is to admit what it did wrong. Abe visited the Yasukuni Shrine in December last year, marking the first time in 7 years that a sitting Japanese Prime Minister has visited the shrine. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
With just 2 days to go before the Sochi Winter Olympic Games open on Friday evening local time, the Olympic flame made its way into the host city on Wednesday, and Team Korea held an entrance ceremony at the Olympic Village. For all the latest, our Olympics correspondent Song Ji-san reports.
After traveling some 65,000 kilometers, climbing mountains, plunging into a lake, and even making its first journey into space on a Russian spacecraft, The Olympic flame arrived in Sochi on Wednesday, ending a 4-month journey. The identity of the final torchbearer is still under wraps, but we do know that the torch will be lit at the main stadium on Friday evening during the opening ceremony. Team Korea held a welcoming ceremony at the Olympic Village on Wednesday, vying once again to finish in the top 10 in the medal count for the 3rd consecutive Winter Games. Seoul is sending its largest number of winter sports athletes to the Games, with 71 on the roster. There were headlines off the ice as well on Wednesday. It was confirmed that Pan Ki-moon will become the first UN chief to give a keynote speech to the International Olympic Committee's General Assembly this week before attending the opening ceremony on Friday. However, other prominent world leaders, including the presidents of the United States, France, and Germany, will not attend, all taking stands against Russia's anti-gay laws. At the opening speech of the General Assembly Wednesday, IOC President Thomas Bach slammed politicians for using the Sochi Olympics as a political platform on the backs of the athletes. 송지선, 아리랑 뉴스.
And it's time for weather. Let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center for a checkup. Now, Bo-kyung, things seem to be warming up a bit. How are things looking like tomorrow?
Well, Tia, the cold wave advisories were lifted earlier today, and tomorrow morning temperatures will jump about 4 degrees compared to today. Currently, the southern regions are at the edge of a high-pressure system from China, which is why we're seeing cloudy skies down south. Well, tomorrow, snow showers are forecast throughout most of the southern regions. About 3 centimeters of snow may pile up, and about 30 millimeters of rain will fall on Jeju. The snow showers will clear up by tomorrow afternoon, but will continue through late at night in Jeju. Other than that, dry weather warnings are still in effect, so please be sure to keep yourselves hydrated. Seoul and Daegu make it to 4 degrees, while Busan peaks at 5. Moving on to other regions, rainy Jeju makes it to 8 degrees, while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang hit 1 and -5 degrees, respectively. Well, that's all I have for you this hour, and let's take a look at the international weather.
And that's our broadcast on this Wednesday evening. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul. Thanks for watching.